Hi, welcome back. We are going to begin with chapter 13, where we left off last time. Leo and Remy had found their way into the flying farm room, and all chaos broke loose. Miss Sparks came in at the end, had followed them in there, was trying to get them, obviously caught in the wrong spot. They took Betty. She's a little crankus, kind of waddling off on her own. Then they found out the goat that they needed to help them was Merle, and he's actually a flying goat that is controlled by the key card like a touchscreen on the other side. So now they've escaped into another hole opened up in the ceiling after they figured all of that out. And by the time Miss Sparks got into the room, they were gone. And so here we are with chapter 13, The Ghost Orchid. I know what this is, Betty quacked at the sound of Leo's voice, but she had grown timid after being set down. Something about the room didn't agree with her. How could anyone know what this is? Asked Remy. Merle, the flying goat, hovered over Betty's head, watching the duck curiously. My grandpa, the one on my mom's side, he was a pack rat, said Leo. And you're telling me this because... Leo stepped out into the maze. His apartment was so full of junk that it made a path that wound from room to room. Do you know what they call a thing like that? A junkyard? No, Remy, not a junkyard. It's called a goat trail, and that's exactly what this is. The two boys gazed into the maze, which was oddly frightening to behold. The entire thing appeared to be made of junk, pile after pile, rising all the way to the ceiling. Chairs, old dishwashers, cans of paint, picture frames, books, shelves, computers, telephones, car tires. It went on and on and on, and it all looked as if it might crumble to the floor at any moment. Do you hear that? Remy asked. The junk was moving, like the sound of a very old boat on a windswept pond. I have a feeling we better not touch any of it, said Leo. The goat trail was narrow, barely wide enough for two boys, a duck, and a flying goat to pass in single file. Hey, Leo, check this out. Remy held the gray key card out so Leo could see it. The touchscreen had changed. Now I see why we needed a flying goat, said Leo. Betty quacked as if to say, Myrtle's not the only one that can fly around here, you know. There's the end, said Remy, touching a flashing green arrow at the far end of the screen. He might have been smarter to point, not touch, because Merle was gone around the first corner of the goat trail before they could stop him. Remy was just about to push on the start of the maze again and call Merle back when Leo grabbed him by the arm and pulled him into the maze. Run! The towering junk teetered back and forth and started to crumble, and then the entryway to the maze came crashing down as Betty took flight and landed in Leo's arms. An old bicycle seat flew through the air and hit Leo in the back of the head. It was a soft seat, but it hit him hard, knocking him forward as Betty sprang free and flew away. Leo, don't move, yelled Remy. They'd come around the first corner, and the junk was no longer only on both sides of them. Remy was the first to see that the junk was now over the top of them as well. They were trapped in a cocoon of garage sale offfits, cast-offs. One false move and the whole room would come crashing down on top of them both. Well, I'm okay, in case you're interested, said Leo, rubbing the back of his head as he sat up. Glad to hear it. Both boys sat on the floor, staring at the fallen entryway as Remy called Merle back with a touch of his finger. The keycard screen now showed their progress, so he knew where to touch, and Merle was hovering overhead a few seconds later. There's only one pathway out of this crazy thing, said Leo, staring down at the narrow goat trail that branched out like veins in every direction. Good thing we have a flying goat that can lead the way. You said it, brother, Remy offered. He hadn't meant it to sound like they really were brothers, but they both smiled awkwardly at the idea anyway. Where's Betty? Asked Leo, suddenly realizing the duck was gone. They both worried over which path she might have flown down, and Leo felt especially terrible. I should never have brought her in here. If she gets turned around, she'll never find her way out. Remy sent Merle back toward the exit, and they followed, careful not to touch the walls as they went. Each time Merle got too far ahead of them, Remy called him back with the touch of a finger. They went on like this, in circles, it seemed, for some time, until Leo heard a loud crash somewhere off to the left. Both boys could only think of one thing, but neither of them would say it. Betty. Let's just keep moving. We'll find her, said Remy. And so they did. 10 minutes later, Leo was sure they'd come back to the same spot. I saw that mailbox a while back, he said, pointing to a rusted-out box without a door holding someone's old mail. They heard another crash, this time on the right, and the floor started to move. This can't be good, said Remy, balancing as his feet wobbled back and forth. He put the gray key card in his pocket for safekeeping, just as the floor gave way in a perfect circle 10 feet back. The circle was about 2 feet across, the path they stood on falling away into black. A second later, another hole caved in, and then another. Those holes are chasing us, yelled Leo. Which way? They'd come to a fork in the path. Remy pulled the key card out of his pocket once more, but Merle was at the exit again. The card had told Merle where to go, but the flying goat was so far ahead, he'd left Leo and Remy wondering where to turn. I can't remember which way to go, Remy said, 3 more holes appearing behind them. Leo looked in both directions. If he chose wrong, the holes might chase them into a dead end and swallow them up. I say left, said Remy. I was thinking the same thing, said Leo. Well, at least we'll be right or wrong together. As a hole dropped through right behind them, Leo lost his footing and began to fall back. Remy grabbed Leo by the hand and pulled as he felt the floor shifting under his feet. 2 seconds, maybe 3, and a hole would appear, dragging them both under. Remy pulled as hard as he could and dove down the path. Leo landed on top of Remy, then accidentally batted the wall of junk with his hand. The ceiling made a horrible grinding noise as everything shifted. Both boys closed their eyes tight, waiting for the end. 3 seconds passed, then 5, then 10. The ceiling, it appeared, was going to hold. You dove right, said Leo, sitting up and seeing where they'd landed, right on the edge of the Y in the path. The holes had continued to the left, as far as he could see. Whew, good thing you almost fell into that hole, or we'd both be goners. Leo and Remy stood up, called Merle back, and worried about Betty. You probably saved my life right there, said Leo as they kept walking. How about I take you to the cake room when we get out of here? Now you're talking. Merle returned very quickly this time, which told them something important. They were near the end of the goat trail. In fact, as they came around the next corner, they could see the exit, which bothered them both. We can't leave Betty in here, said Leo. What would Merganser think? But they needn't have worried so much. They heard Betty's familiar quack, and it wasn't coming from anywhere behind them. It was coming from somewhere beyond the exit. Smart duck you got there, said Remy. No doubt, Leo answered, and they both followed Merle to the end of the path. The closer they got, the more they thought they heard a new sound, like rusty scissors opening and closing. It did not strike either of them as a good sound. Did you see that? Asked Remy, stopping in his tracks. I do, said Leo, and they both started running. The old sinks and crock pots and dressers were moving, not toward them, but away from them. The wall of junk was coming alive. Bad flying creatures, yelled Remy. Bad, bad, bad! They'd run with everything they had to the exit, watching as toasters and tricycles and everything else sprang to life and began flying overhead. Like a host of sleeping prehistoric flying beasts, the walls and the ceiling woke up, screeching their terrible wings over a field of flowers. Behind them, the entire maze fell to the floor with a great crash, and Leo had to wonder whether or not the whole hotel wouldn't fall down with it. Behind them lay a junkyard, before them a pristine field of flowers, over their heads an unimaginable sky of flying garbage. Are they mechanical or are they holograms? Remy asked, hoping against hope for the latter. I've never been in here before. I have no idea, Leo answered. But then a flying picture frame slammed into the junk pile, sparks of glass flying everywhere. I think that answers our question, said Remy. This stuff is real. We're dead. They stood at the edge of the junkyard as crazy flying creatures guarded the field of flowers. Merle had joined in, and the key card had gone totally blank, so they weren't getting any more help from the flying goat. What are we supposed to do? Asked Remy. The key card began to vibrate in his hand, and the black screen wasn't totally black anymore. It looked like someone was inside the card, writing on the screen with their finger, as if the screen were filled with black soot and it could be wiped away from another world that lay hidden in the card. Leo, you better check this out. Leo ducked as a giant bug with a popcorn popper for a head did a kamikaze dive, crashing into the debris with a flash of sparks. He leaned in close to the screen and watched as a message appeared. Always good to have a duck. Duck! Both boys looked up and saw a swarm of flying metal insects, all of them made of globs of scissors, diving towards them. They ducked to the floor in the nick of time, and the bugs exploded against the junk pile, raining down scissors as Leo and Remy fire rolled out of the way. We were almost shish kebabs, yelled Remy. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be the main course at the next Whippet Hotel barbecue. I'm with you, said Leo, and he whistled 3 times fast, the same whistle his father had used in the hotel lobby when Betty and her buddies had gone berserk. The sound echoed through the room, and off in the distance, at the far end of the field of flowers, a tiny duck head popped up. Betty quacked. Then she ran and took flight, calling out wildly as she careened around the room. The flying junk gathered in a line behind her, as if it were being called to follow, and Betty was its leader. She flew around and around until all the rubbish followed her like a long whipping tail. Go, Betty, go! Remy yelled. And go she did, over the junkyard, swooping high, then diving straight down. She turned at the last second, and every flying creature slammed one by one into the scrap pile. All was quiet then, but for the sound of Betty's wings as she flew overhead and back to where she'd come from on the other end of the room. A moment later, she landed in the tall flowers, and Leo couldn't see her anymore. I have a feeling she knows where we're supposed to go, he said. Remy just shook his head. Always bring a duck. Words to live by. The room felt deathly still as they walked a thin path through a field of orchids. These are hard to grow, said Leo, having a sudden memory he'd all but forgotten. How do you know that? They're orchids. They take special care. The memory flooded back now as Leo reached out and touched the weirdly shaped flowers. Some were orange, some red, some blue, and all of them had long green stems and oddly shaped petals. My mom tried to grow them once in our living room under a lamp, said Leo, a dreaminess to his voice that Remy hadn't heard before. She said it would make our apartment feel like magic. And it did. I remember now, she did grow an orchid. Only one? Asked Remy. But looking at the flowers, he could see how one, just one, would be enough to make his own crummy apartment feel magical. Remy, I know what the ghost is, said Leo, a tingle in his voice. What ghost? The one from the box, remember? Tipping cows, a ghost, apple juice. Oh, yeah, that one's had me stumped. Leo didn't answer. He simply kept on down the path, looking back and forth over the field of orchids. As they approached the end of the path, the garden turned swampy and they waded through a foot of water with fallen trees strewn about. You smell that? Asked Remy. It smells like apple juice. That means it's blooming, said Leo, spotting Betty lolling in the water contentedly. She was swimming around under a branch, and on the branch sat a perfectly white box with its lid open. Light was coming out of the box. Hold on a second, Leo. The finger's back. Remy held out the key card so Leo could see as it vibrated, the screen filling once more with black. By the way, whoever's in the card, they can see us, said Remy. He'd been thinking about it a lot. How else would they have known to say, duck? Leo looked all around, expecting to see Mr. M hiding somewhere, but he did not. The finger drew a message, then crossed part of it out. The box is for Leo. Leo crossed out. Ooh, it looks like I might get this one, said Remy. I wonder why. But that was not to be. Instead, the finger filled in a different name. The box is for Clarence. Remy looked at Leo, who didn't seem to mind. In fact, he was smiling. The box is for your dad? Uh-huh, Leo answered. Then he turned for the box and quietly moved through the water. Be very quiet and careful. They're sensitive. Who are? Asked Remy. That smell of apple juice comes from only one flower, Remy. My mom never dreamed of trying to grow one because it's the rarest flower in the world. But she told us about it. The ghost orchid. Cool, said Remy. They both leaned over, staring into the white box, and there it was, the rarest flower of them all, in a full bloom of white. That's a cool-looking flower, said Remy, and I don't even like flowers. You're right, it's like magic. And look, the box is made to hold it. It's got lights in the lid and on the floor. It's perfect. The key card vibrated once more, and a final message appeared. 6 a.m. tomorrow. Duck elevator. Only Leo. It's okay, said Remy, seeing that Leo wished they could go together. My mom and I don't get here until 7 anyway. Good luck, bro. Leo shut the lid on the box and gently picked it up. When he did, a door popped open on the wall to the left of the field of flowers. There were white stairs leading down, which would take them back to the flying farm room, where Ms. Sparks awaited them both. Chapter 14. Fired. Leo left Remy in the upper part of the hotel and crept down to the basement with the box. They both agreed that Remy would play the decoy, drawing Miss Sparks away if she appeared. The last person they wanted getting her hands on such a special box was old Beehive Head. As Leo walked, the box dimmed slowly from light to dark. Night for the ghost orchid had come. Opening the door to the basement, Leo saw lights flashing against the walls. No more trouble, he said to himself. At least the siren isn't going off. As he crept down the stairs and peered around the corner, he saw, to his relief, that his father wasn't there. What was not so relieving was the state of the call center. Daisy had spit out a rolling pile of twisted paper that looked like it was a mile long, and she was still going. The ticker tape of broken things in the hotel kept getting longer and longer, and all the lights on the call center wall were flashing. Leo had never seen the call center so wild with activity, so wild, in fact, that steam was pouring out of the corners of the wall. It looked like the entire thing might explode at any moment. But why no siren? Leo inspected the call center more closely and saw that someone, probably his dad, had cut all the sound wires which dangled and sparked against the wall. He must have grown tired of all the noise, Leo said, speaking this time to the ghost orchid hidden in the box. Good thing. I know how loud noises bother you. The ghost orchid was delicate. It bloomed over and over in the summer, but only if the conditions were right. Too much clatter or a storm, anything like that, and the flower would close and might not ever open again. Better get you safely hidden away, said Leo, stepping over piles of ticker tape on his way to his cot. As he slid the box under his bed, he took note of the 4 boxes that had gathered there first. The purple one, then the blue, then green, and now white. 4 boxes. He was arranging them just so when the door to the basement opened. He stood up, leaning against the washing machine as casually as he could. He expected to see his father racing back for tools to fix this or that, but when he looked up, it was Ms. Sparks. She had Remy by the ear, and he bounced down the stairs behind her, yelling for Leo to run. "Shut up, enchilada!" Leo looked at the tiny window above his cot and wondered if he could reach it, climb through, and run for the gate. He was that scared by the look on Ms. Sparks' face. "If you know what's good for you, you'll get to the puzzle room," she said. Leo could practically feel her icy cold breath. "Now!" Leo was terrified that the booming voice of Miss Sparks would kill the ghost orchid before he even had a chance to give it to his father. The thought sent him scurrying for the door, right past Miss Sparks as she slapped him on the back of the head. Looking back, Leo saw that Miss Sparks was eyeing the basement, walking farther into his home without being invited. She dragged Remy behind her and stood before the call center. "Are you coming?" asked Leo from the top of the stairs. "I'll leave here when I please and not a moment sooner," said Miss Sparks, looking at the boiler, the shelves of boxes, the washing machine, the cots. "I'm going then," said Leo, trying to distract her. "I'll be in the puzzle room, like you asked." "Take your friend with you," said Miss Sparks, letting Remy go with a twist of her hand as if she were snapping her fingers with his ear in between. "Just so you know," said Remy, "that really hurt." "Get out!" she screamed, and Leo's heart broke again. What rare and beautiful flower could possibly live in the same space as Miss Sparks' shrill voice? Neither boy spoke as they walked through the lobby and into the puzzle room, having no idea what they might find there. All Leo could think about was Miss Sparks finding all 4 boxes, which would mean she'd know about the secret rooms. What then? What would she do? He was sure she was behind all the trouble at the hotel, sure it had been her at the gate with the black car plotting the hotel's demise with a shady developer. She was driving down the price of the hotel and getting a piece of the action. Or worse, she would own the Whippet with someone's help. Oh, it was a complete and total disaster in the making. Still, even those dark thoughts didn't prepare Leo for what awaited him in the puzzle room. "You two are slow, slow, slow!" yelled Miss Sparks, who had crept up behind them and was now pushing them forward. "Sit down there," she said, pointing to the only empty chairs in the room. Leo's dad was sitting in the room too, along with Remy's mom and Mr. Phipps. It was the entire Whippet Hotel staff, the hotel maid, the gardener, and the maintenance man. And Miss Sparks, the hotel manager, was about to come unglued. "I understand there was a party tonight," she began, clicking her fingernails on the long table that held the puzzle. "Which surprises me because I wasn't invited. No one likes to be left out when there's a party, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Phipps?" She said it like it was an accusation, like she knew he hadn't attended the party. "I don't know about any party," he said, calm and collected as he always was. "You had to wake me up for this meeting, remember?" "Silence!" shouted Miss Sparks, her hand in his face. "Have you toured the ground since I woke you? I suppose not. When you do, you'll find that someone has made a fool of you." "I don't know what you're talking about." Miss Sparks knew how much Mr. Phipps liked working on the puzzle, futile as it was, and how he especially liked to stack the pieces into groups that looked the same. She swept her hand across one of the neatly organized piles and sent puzzle pieces flying across the room. "That's just mean," said Remy, a little too loudly. Miss Sparks gave him the evil eye. "I'll deal with you soon enough," she said, turning back to the gardener, who wouldn't look her in the eye. "What you will find," Miss Sparks continued, "is that someone has taken shears to your beloved bushes." "Why, that's impossible," said Mr. Phipps, but he was clearly shaken. I would have heard." "Ah, you would have heard if you weren't at a party." "But I wasn't at the party," said Mr. Phipps. All he really wanted to do was get up and go look at his garden, but Miss Sparks wasn't about to let him off that easily. Leo and Remy glanced at each other. Mr. Phipps hadn't been at the party, or at least they hadn't seen him there. "They'd cut up all your sculptured bushes, the ducks, the rabbits, all of them." "What?" cried Mr. Phipps. "But that's, well, it's—" He couldn't find the words to say. He'd spent years training the bushes, and he loved the garden at the Whippet. It was probably the cruelest thing a person could do to a gardener. Miss Sparks seemed satisfied to have tongue-tied Mr. Phipps, so she moved on, pointing her long finger at Remy's mom. "And you, responsible for keeping this place clean and tidy, what were you doing at a party when you're being paid to clean rooms?" Well, Pilar looked at Mr. Fillmore, but there was nothing he could do. I'd already cleaned all the rooms and— "Save your excuses," said Miss Sparks. "Maybe if you'd been attending the hotel instead of dancing the night away, we wouldn't have a theft to deal with." "A what?" asked Leo's dad, the first two words out of his mouth since they'd arrived in the room. There had never, ever been a theft of any kind in the 5 years he'd been the maintenance man. This was bad. Very bad. They always blamed the help. "A theft," Ms. Sparks repeated like she was talking to a room full of school children. "Someone has stolen Mrs. Yancey's diamond necklace." Pilar gasped, for she had seen the necklace in the cake room, lying unattended on a black velvet cloth in the bedroom. She'd been dusting the pink cupcake chairs, and there it was. "I see from your expression you know the necklace of which I speak," said Miss Sparks, leaning over the shaking Pilar. Remy couldn't help but notice the spider was gone, but oh, how he wished he'd had it back again. What he wouldn't give to drop it down Miss Sparks' pants right about now. "That necklace," said Miss Sparks, "is worth more than all of your salaries put together for the rest of your lives. She's convinced one of you took it, and so am I." "Well, of course she is," said Clarence Fillmore. "Who else is she going to blame?" "Not that spoiled kid of theirs, that's for sure," said Leo, which earned him an evil eye of his own from Miss Sparks. "Quiet, all of you!" shouted Miss Sparks, turning her attention to Pilar. "I examined the contents of your pushcart, and I think you know what I found." Miss Sparks pulled the diamond necklace slowly out of her pockets. "I don't believe you," said Clarence Fillmore. "None of us do." But Miss Sparks had already moved on, happy to have Clarence take center stage as she put the necklace back in her pocket. "And finally you, Mr. Fillmore, you with the tools and the belt and the overalls. You look like a maintenance man. What I can't figure out is why you don't act like one." "We can't help it if someone is sabotaging the hotel," said Leo. "Things are breaking faster than we can fix them, and you know it. All I know is that you were at a party, and while you were, the hotel fell into ruin. I couldn't find the maintenance crew, so I went searching. And do you know what I found?" "Uh-oh," said Remy. "Yes, uh-oh indeed, Remilio, I found you." Miss Sparks pointed at both Leo and Remy. You were not at the party after all, were you? We were at the party, Leo protested. We just left for a minute. Oh, come now, you know that's not true. You were missing a long time, long enough to cause all sorts of new problems, right? I mean, really, who would know better than you, Leo Fillmore, how to break things in this hotel? Leo and Remy and Mr. Fillmore all protested, but Miss Sparks had the loudest voice of them all, and she silenced them. Here's what I think. I think you're all in this together. I think it's all an elaborate setup. And do you know what else I think? Everyone sat silently because they knew what was coming. She was the hotel manager. She could do it in Mr. Whippet's absence if she chose to. If he ever returned, she would simply say they'd stolen from one of the guests. She had always known how to get what she wanted from Merganser D. Whippet. Here we go, Remy whispered to Leo. Nice knowing you. You are all, each and every one of you, and Miss Sparks, drawing in a great breath of air and pausing for effect, fired. Mr. Phipps seemed not to care in the slightest, and the moment she said the word, he left the room to inspect the damage in the garden he'd put so much work into. He cared an awful lot about the Whippet. If he really were to leave, the grounds would never be the same. Pilar looked at Leo's father, and Leo had the feeling that something might have bloomed if only they'd had more time. He wasn't sure how he felt about the idea, but he wanted more than anything for his dad to be happy again. He had been thinking that maybe the Fillmore men were finally ready to move on. Thanks for everything, Remy said, pulling Leo aside where they could talk one last time without being overheard. It was the best day of my life, and I'm not just saying that. If you find Blop, tell him I said hello. The two boys might as well have lived on different planets. Staten Island and Manhattan were worlds apart. I don't know what to say, Leo offered. It feels like we were close to something. We just can't figure out what. You've got a date with Destiny in the morning, remember? Who knows? Maybe our luck will change. In all the chaos, Leo had totally forgotten. 6 a.m. tomorrow, duck elevator. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. Remy rejoined his mom, and Ms. Sparks escorted them through the lobby and out the front doors where they stood staring through the glass. The doors were locked, and the two started down the path for the subway. I know you didn't take the necklace, Mom, said Remy. I know you do, said Pilar, putting an arm around him. They walked in silence then, both of them dreaming of what might have been. Miss Sparks was back in the puzzle room in no time flat with final instructions for the maintenance man and his son. Pack your things in the morning, she commanded. I'll be bringing in a new crew by the afternoon. Enjoy your last night at the Whippet. She patted her pocket and started for the stairs. I've got some good news to deliver, wouldn't you say? And then just like that, she was gone. Leo looked around the room and suddenly realized something terrible. It wasn't just Miss Sparks who had left. Everyone was gone. Leo and his dad walked to the basement, maybe for the last time. We've really come to the end, I guess, said Clarence Fillmore. I'd hoped we'd see him again, but I think it's really true. What's true? Leo's big, lumbering father took a deep breath as he opened the door to the basement. Merganser D. Whippet isn't coming back. Bernard Frescobaldi was waiting in his black town car when Pilar and Remy unlocked the small walking gate and started down the wide, empty sidewalk. He noticed how unhappy they were, but made no effort to help them as they started their long night journey to Staten Island. Milton smiled knowingly from the front seat. This is going better than I could have hoped, said Bernard, pulling his fedora down low over his eyes in case they searched the street. It wouldn't have mattered behind the dark windows, but Bernard was an exceptionally secretive man. He took no chances, especially when he was this close to the prize he'd worked so hard for. 20 minutes later, still sitting in the car, Bernard glanced at his very expensive watch. "What's taking so long?" he asked. "I thought for sure the gate would open by now." 5 more minutes passed with Milton calming his wealthy boss, and then the driving gate opened up. Someone from the inside had opened it, letting the black town car in. "Time to prepare for the meeting," said Bernard Frescobaldi. "Tomorrow, the Whippet Hotel will finally get the new owner it deserves." The call center in the basement had one giant plug, the head of which was bigger than a baseball with a 4-inch wide cord to match. It took both Leo and his dad to pull it out of the wall, but when they did, Daisy stopped printing ticker tape. The shark, for the first time all day, was silent. All the lights on the wall went out, and for a split second, Leo imagined the Whippet Hotel as it once was, full of laughter and smiles, mystery and intrigue, not a care from the world outside. Both Fillmore men got into their pajamas and brushed their teeth. They went about their business rather slowly, savoring every bittersweet moment in the cozy basement that had been their home for a good long time. "Mom would have wanted a flower on a night like this," said Leo, risking the possibility of turning a very bad night into a sad one to boot. But he had a feeling, even with everything that had gone wrong, that something had changed. "Do you think about her?" Leo asked as they both lay down on their cots, the washing machine sitting quiet and cold between them. Mr. Fillmore stood up, looked about the room, then grabbed his cot by the edge and pulled the old frame out from the wall. He took hold of Leo's neck, pulling his cot away from the wall as well, and then he got back into his bed and lay on his side where he could see his boy's face. "I should have done that years ago," said Leo's dad. "Actually, the washer blocks your snoring, especially when it's running." "Leo, listen to me now. We're going to be fine, and none of this is your fault." Leo held back tears because he was pretty sure it was his fault. "And yes, I think about your mom all the time. I hope you do too." "I do, Dad." There was a long silence in which Leo thought maybe a tear had fallen from his dad's eye, but it was dark and he couldn't be sure. "I think she would have liked this place," Leo's dad said. "But more than that, I think she would have wanted us to keep living." "You think?" "I do, Dad." Mr. Fillmore held the ring on the chain, rubbing it like it was a good luck charm. He'd had a hard time forgiving himself for letting it slip away during the move to the Whippet. "I felt bad for losing your mother's ring. You know that, don't you?" "Of course I know," Leo said. It just happened, and anyway, it's back now." Clarence Fillmore smiled. "It's different now. I still miss her, but I'm not so sad anymore." Leo leaned over and pulled the white box out from the hiding spot. He opened the lid, and white light filled the room. The ghost orchid bloomed to life. "I found this for us," said Leo. "I thought maybe Miss Sparks had killed it, but I guess not." The two of them couldn't help it then. Maintenance men being notoriously emotional, they both shed a tear or two. "Fresh start tomorrow?" asked Mr. Fillmore, his voice filled with everything the moment demanded. Sadness for what had been lost, unease about the future, but above all, something new. A readiness to start living again. "Fresh start tomorrow," said Leo, sinking into his cot one last time. They watched the ghost orchid for a time, and then Leo drifted off to sleep, and Mr. Fillmore closed the white box and silently carried it out of the basement. He knew a certain gardener who needed a ghost orchid even more than he did. Chapter 15. The 13th Floor. The alarm on Leo's watch went off at 5:30 in the morning, but it didn't matter. He had awoken with the first light of day to find the note stuck to his bedpost. "I thought Mr. Phipps could use a look at the ghost orchid. Hope you don't mind, Dad." The box was gone, and for a moment Leo worried he might need it for something, but barring that, he didn't plan to ask for the flower back. Mr. Phipps would know how to care for it. And Leo's dad was right. It was the perfect gift for a displaced gardener who had had his garden ransacked. Leo turned off the alarm on his watch and adjusted his position in the duck elevator. He knew he had to be there at 6, as the message had said, but there was no reason to wait. He might get sidetracked by some other duty, or Ms. Sparks might try to kick them out of the building on sight. Better to hide in the duck elevator and make sure he didn't miss the appointment altogether. It was an appointment, he was sure, that would not be offered twice. At 5:47, Leo heard Ms. Sparks come into the lobby and make some keys, for what, he did not know or care. A period of silence followed, and then, precisely at 6 o'clock, the duck elevator moved. Leo did not pull the lever or press the button for the roof, but either way, those things would never have made the elevator move as it did now. No, this was something new. The duck elevator was moving sideways, not up or down. It was, in fact, moving parallel to the lobby, under the grand staircase Leo had climbed many times. The duck elevator stopped, and when it did, a section of the back wall slid slowly down, revealing 4 buttons and a frosted sheet of glass. "Here we go," said Leo. The finger was back, writing a message on cold frosted glass. "These buttons you only push once. Push them wrong at your own peril." Leo felt supremely excited as he read the message, because he knew then that his journey with Remy had given them the knowledge only they could possibly have. The only way a person could know the order in which to push purple, blue, green, and white buttons would be if they had 4 boxes to match. Leo had gotten the boxes in a certain order, and he knew which buttons to push first, and so he did. Purple. The elevator moved abruptly sideways once more, this time in a different direction. Leo pushed the next button, blue. The elevator moved again, lurching to a stop. Green was pushed, and the elevator moved once more. "Only 1 button left," said Leo. He wished Remy were with him, or at least Betty, Blop, or Merle the flying goat. He felt suddenly very alone in the world as his finger hovered over the white button. And then he pushed it. The duck elevator began spinning in a circle, and then it shot up through the Whippet Hotel as fast as the double helix had ever gone. Leo put his hands on the low ceiling and braced himself. Either the duck elevator was about to stop, or they were going right through the roof and into the air. The duck elevator did stop, almost as suddenly as it had started. The number 13 appeared above the 4 buttons with the sound of a bell. But there is no 13th, floor 13, Leo said. But even as he said it, he knew there had always been 13 floors. He'd simply never been invited to any of the secret floors, or the very secret floor at the top. Leo took a deep breath to calm himself, threw open the duck elevator door, and crawled out into the room. He stood up but did not speak. Overhead, he saw the bottom of the pond, which he now realized was made of glass. He could see the duck feet flapping and the fish swimming. Light poured in through the pond, filling the 13th floor with a dreamy golden hue. There were books everywhere, on tables and endless shelves winding this way and that. There were long, lazy-looking couches and overstuffed chairs. There were huge beanbags, some pink like a pig and others black and white like dairy cows. Colored rings of every size drifted near the ceiling, held by some unknowable magnetic force, and flying holographic farm animals swooped high and low. But mostly, there were books. Lots and lots of books. "It's the library," Leo found himself saying, for it was indeed the Whippet Library where Merganser came to think, and think some more. A perfectly silent train made its way around the wide perimeter. There was someone on the train, and Leo knew him right away. He was dressed in black, which was not his normal attire, but it was him. There could be no doubt. Welcome to the 13th floor, said the man. I hope you like it as much as I do. Mr. Phipps? Asked Leo, because it was none other than the gardener himself. Thank you for the ghost orchid. I was hoping you might let me have it. You're welcome, said Leo, because he couldn't think of anything else to say. And now I have something rather important to give you, something that was left in my care. Leo was so confused and amazed he just stood in the library, gawking at the gardener, unable to speak. Mr. Phipps took a leather case out of his black jacket and unwrapped it. From inside, he pulled a silver chain, and on the end of the silver chain sat the Whippet Hotel's sole silver keycard. Is that? Leo began, but he couldn't finish. Merganser D. Whippet's silver keycard? The one that unlocks every door, even the many hidden doors? Yes, it is. Why do you have it? Asked Leo. Mr. Phipps took a piece of folded paper from the same leather case and held it with the key card in one hand. You love the Whippet, don't you, Leo? Of course I do. Then take the silver key card. Leo reached out his hand, not really sure what it meant to have the key, and then took the paper with it. Put the silver key card around your neck and the paper in your pocket, Mr. Phipps instructed. Leo hung the chain around his neck and put the paper in the front pocket of his maintenance overalls. What's the paper? He asked. Why, it's the deed to the Whippet Hotel, of course. Why else would you have the silver key card? The what? Mr. Phipps looked Leo in the eye and smiled. Leo Fillmore, you own the Whippet Hotel. At least for the moment. Leo felt as if he might stop breathing. Could it really be true? No, it could not. Something wasn't right. Who gave you the authority to give me the Whippet Hotel? Only Merganser can do that, and he's missing. He hated to say the next part because he really liked Mr. Phipps. Did you steal the silver key card from Mr. Whippet? Mr. Phipps was a patient man, but there were things to be done and little time to do them in. Climb aboard. We've got someplace to be. Leo didn't know if he could trust Mr. Phipps, but there seemed to be some plan in motion, and he certainly didn't know of any other way out of the Whippet Library. Stepping into the train car and sitting down, he asked the gardener another question. So, you're the mysterious Mr. M? It's you who's been following me and Remy around all this time, scaring us half to death with that finger of yours? Helping you. And keeping Captain Rickenbacker entertained, which is no easy task, let me tell you. But why? Mr. Phipps wouldn't answer as the train followed a track that wound higher and higher and higher until he had to duck in order to miss the ceiling. Or did he? Was the ceiling a hologram too? It would appear so, because they went right through it and came to a hidden station on the other side. You'll have to get out of the train now, said Mr. Phipps. Leo stepped out onto a lonely platform where a set of stairs led up into darkness. Up there you'll find your way, said Mr. Phipps. He's a crafty one, so be careful what you say. Good luck. The train pulled away, disappearing down into the Whippet Library, and Leo was alone. I wish Remy were here, he said, climbing the stairs until his hand bumped up against the ceiling. He pushed and light poured in. If Leo could have seen the world from the other side, he would have watched as a square of grass on the roof opened up and a boy peeked out. Over here,
Make it snappy. You don't want to keep Mr. Frescobaldi waiting. Mr. Who? Asked Leo, stepping out onto the roof and letting the trap door slam shut behind him. There was a short man standing before him whom he had never seen before. Come, said the man, waving Leo on. This way. He's waiting for you. Leo saw the ducks in the pond, though Betty wasn't there. He thought about whistling 3 times fast and calling her, but what good would having a duck by his side do? I'm not going anywhere until you tell me who you are, said Leo. The man hesitated and seemed poised to tell a lie. My name is Milton. Satisfied? Now, please, come quickly. This will all be over before you know it. There had always been a small outcropping of trees on the roof in the far corner, away from the pond. In amongst the trees was a stone bench, and on the bench sat Bernard Frescobaldi. He had on a long gray coat with the collar turned up, black glasses, and a black fedora. He was staring out over the city. Who are you, and how did you get up here? Asked Leo. Leo didn't know who these people were, but he didn't like the idea of 2 total strangers on the roof of the Whippet. The man in the long gray coat would not turn around, but he signaled with his hand, and Milton came near. Leo watched as they whispered, then Milton delivered the message. We understand that you have the silver key card and the deed to the hotel, and we have an offer for you. Leo was on red alert and thought seriously about calling Betty or running for the trapdoor. Mr. Phipps was a traitor, probably in on the deal with Miss Sparks and whoever these 2 were. You give us the silver key card and the deed, continued Milton. He coughed as if the next thing he was about to say was going to hurt. And we will give you $50 million. Leo's jaw dropped. $50 million? He had no idea how much the Whippet was worth, but 50 million would mean a lot. His dad would never have to work again. He could buy Remy and Pilar a real house. He could go to college. Still, if the Whippet really was his, didn't he have an obligation to protect it from a wrecking ball and, more importantly, from that awful Miss Sparks? Leo watched as the man in the long gray coat whispered to Milton once more. It's falling apart anyway, Milton went on, and you don't know how to run a hotel. We'll offer 50 million, not a penny more. Little did Leo know that the land the Whippet sat on, not to mention the countless treasures inside, was worth at least 10 times that. But the truth was, it didn't matter. No amount of money was going to get Leo to give up the Whippet Hotel. He'd already made up his mind. He belonged here. He wanted to stay. You're standing on the roof of my hotel, and I want you off, he said. Both of you. I love this place, and you can't have it. Milton looked stunned as the man in the long gray coat stood up abruptly. He still would not turn around, and Leo had just about had it with whoever this guy was. He whistled 3 times fast, hoping to get some help from a duck, and then Milton started smiling. I told you this would happen. I told you. Leo whistled 3 times again, and this time he heard Betty quacking, but she would not come. If you did anything to my duck, you're in big trouble, said Leo. Betty is busy, said the man in the long gray coat. What did you say? Leo asked. Not because he hadn't heard, but because he had. He knew that voice. She's laid her eggs and is going to have babies, yelled the man in the long gray coat, and he threw off his hat, which revealed a wild whip of hair that simply would not stay down no matter how hard he tried. He turned, and it was not Bernard Frescobaldi, for there was no Bernard Frescobaldi. It was Merganser D. Whippet, as it always had been. Merganser, Leo gasped, first smiling, then laughing and running and hugging his old friend. The one and only, me, and only me. And did you hear the news? Betty's having babies! It was just like Merganser to be excited about a duck, but Leo had to admit the timing couldn't have been better. There'd been a lot of talk about mothers lately. Merganser grabbed Leo by the hand and hauled him down the path of trees, then sat down, clapping his hands. Oh, you see there, she's built her nest. No wonder Betty had been so cranky all week, Leo thought. 6 eggs, said George Powell. For Milton wasn't Milton either. He was George, Merganser's oldest and dearest friend. Leo, meet George. We have a lot to talk about. It would seem so, said Leo, who still didn't believe any of it. Merganser talked and talked, as Merganser was known to do, so it was hard to get a word in edgewise, but Leo tried his best. First of all, Merganser said, you passed. You passed. You passed. You passed. I had my doubts. Really, I did. Ask George. He'll tell you. I thought you might give up, but you took everything I threw at you and kept on going. Even that last part, which I simply had to do. You passed that one, too. Leo didn't quite understand, so George tried to explain while Merganser went to congratulate Betty. I've always stayed away from the hotel, which was by design, because Merganser knew this day might come, a day when he would have to leave the Whippet and move on to other, more pressing matters. I must say I had my doubts as well, but now that I've seen you in action, my doubts have completely vanished. It was one thing to find all the boxes and overcome so very much. We thought you had that in you. But to say no to so much money when you really could have used it, well, that was the most important thing. That was why we had to do things the way we did. But I still don't understand, said Leo, turning back to Merganser. You can't mean it. You can't really want to give me the Whippet Hotel. Oh, but you're wrong, Leo, Merganser replied. I do want to give you the hotel. I can't keep it. Too much to do, too many places to go. You're the only one for the Whippet. But what about Mr. Phipps or my dad or Ms. Sparks? Even Leo couldn't believe he'd said her name, but she was the hotel manager and she had pulled the wool over Merganser's eyes for a long time. Leo, listen to me, said Merganser. It's you. You're the one. No one else will do, don't you see? But Leo didn't see. He simply couldn't do it. Merganser took a long silver pen from his coat pocket and held out his hand for the deed to the Whippet Hotel. Leo gave it to him. We have a lot in common, us two, said Merganser. We both lost our moms too soon. We both want to remember. But there comes a day when we have to move on. Merganser D. Whippet signed the deed over to Leo and handed the paper back, winking at George as he did. And we both found that a true friend can help carry us through lonely times. Am I right, George? So right. So true. Remy, Leo said, thinking of his new friend and wondering what he must be going through. His mom didn't have a job and his dad was a no-show. They might not even be able to pay rent. You have the silver key card now, Leo. And that means you can open any door. Not just the doors in this hotel, but all the doors you're going to find for the rest of your life. Leo held the silver key card in his hand. Will you be here to help me? He asked. It's an awful lot to look after. You'll see me once in a while. And George, too. Don't forget, you've got lots of help if you know where to look. Leo had some thoughts about that, and suddenly he couldn't wait to get cracking on all of the problems plaguing the hotel. There's a lot to fix around here, said Leo. Oh, speaking of which, we have some business to attend to. Merganser got to his feet and pulled a whistle out of his pocket, blowing it twice. What sort of business? Asked Leo, running up behind him. House cleaning. Leo felt a tingle in his toes at the idea of what Merganser D. Whippet might be talking about.